Sahana vavatu, sahano bhunaktu, sahaviryan karavavahai, tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Narayanam Namaskritya Narayanam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Naram Chaiva Devim Saraswatim Chaiva Devim Saraswatim Tato Jayamudirayeta Tato Jayamudirayeta. Very good. Welcome back. We will continue our introduction to the Mahabharata. Our intent, as I mentioned at the end of our meditation session, our intent is to go through the Mahabharata and find those sections which are devoted to very profound spiritual topics. And we'll be doing that soon, but we need to finish our introduction. And introduction means we need to know kind of the opening passages of the Mahabharata give us some of that orientation. Also, I should mention that in general, Book 1, called the Adi Parva, Adi means first, Book 1, the Adi Parva, is mostly devoted to establishing all the major characters of the story. In fact, not just the characters, but their lineage, how they came to be. And perhaps in today's class we'll maybe give you a brief summary of that. Most of you know the story quite well. Just in case you don't, you should at least know the main characters and their relationships. Just know the names of the characters won't help you. You need to know how everyone is related to everyone else. We'll see some of that as we proceed in today's class. So, before we return to the verses, let me just remind you of the basic structure, story within a story. We have the outermost story, which is a discussion between Ugrashravas, who also, he's got a lot of different names. He's a professional storyteller. And the name for a professional storyteller is Suta or Sauti. So be prepared. He can be called any of these three names. And he's narrating the story of the Mahabharata. He's narrating it to the Rishi Shaunaka. And Rishi Shaunaka is performing an elaborate ritual in his ashram in Naimisha Aranya. We'll call this the outermost story, because what Ugrashravas narrates is what he heard from Vaishampayana. So he's narrating a story, the story that was told before by Vaishampayana. You might remember Vaishampayana is one of Vyasa's disciples. Vaishampayana is narrating the story, narrates the story of the Mahabharata. He narrates it to King Janamejaya. King Janamejaya, who's conducting a Sarpa Satra, snake, let me just say snake sacrifice. Too much Sanskrit. And I'll tell you about some of the symbolism of this in a moment. So it turns out, and we'll see this in today's class, that Ugrashravas was present at Janamejaya's snake sacrifice, and Ugrashravas heard Vaishampayana's narration of the Mahabharata. And then whatever Vaishampayana, by the way, is narrating what he heard from Vyasa. So what Vyasa originally told, Vaishampayana narrates to Janamejaya. Ugrashravas was there. He hears a story. Then Shaunaka says, hey, tell whatever you heard, tell me that story. So we get the story told and retold and retold. And then, of course, when Vaishampayana is telling the story, he's telling the story of the Mahabharata. So he's relating the stories about Bhishma and the Pandavas and Kauravas and all of this. And then, just to show you one more level, sometimes these characters start talking about another story, which means you have yet another level. A story within a story within a story within a story. This is the basic structure of the Mahabharata. This is just to get you a little oriented for today's class. As you said, in today's class we want to, I think we'll mostly finish this introductory part on the Adi Parva. Notice we've selected chapters 1. We're not seeing. Are we going to see all the verses of the Mahabharata? 86,000. How long will we be here? Anyway, not in this lifetime. So what we're doing is we're taking selected passages here, in this case from chapters 1, 53 and 54. And I'll show you what's going on. In our prior class, we had seen just the opening few verses of the Mahabharata, including verse 3, which describes Suta. Who is Suta? He's the professional narrator, the narrator of the outermost story. He arrives in Naimisha, Aranya, in that sacred forest, where the Rishi Shaunaka is doing his sacrifice. And so Suta, or Sauti, or Ugrashravas, arrives in Naimisha Aranya, in the sacrifice being conducted by the Rishi Shaunaka. That's where we left off in the last class. We'll pick up the thread. And what we'll try to do today is see a number of verses in this introduction. We want to go quite quickly through verses that are only telling story. When a verse is giving some spiritual instruction, we'll certainly slow down at that time. So far, we're just going to see story for a while. Aprachadrishya, atha prachadrishya tatra, atha prachadrishya, kaschit prastavayan kathaha, kaschit prastavayan kathaha, kutaha gamyate saute, kutaha gamyate, kvachayam vihritastvaya, kvachayam vihritastvaya. Ata, then. So Sauti, having arrived at this ritual in the Naimisha forest, then what happened? Aprachat rishihi tatra, there in the forest at the location where they were doing this ritual. Some rishi, kaschit, in the second line, kaschit rishihi, some rishi. One of the rishis assembled there in the forest. Aprachat, he asked Suta, and he asked Prastavayan as an introduction, Kataha, as an introduction for the whole story that is going to follow. So the Rishi asked Sauti, what did he ask? Kuta agamyate Saute. Saute, O Sauti. Kutaha agamyate. From where did you arrive? Where are you coming from? Kvacha ayam vihritaha tvaya. Kwa chayam. Chayam is not, we're not talking about tea, right? Sorry, in Sanskrit these are two words. Cha, ayam. The words combined due to grammatical rules. There is no chayam in Sanskrit, sorry to disappoint you. Kvacha, and where, ayam, vihritaha tvaya. Where, in what place have you traveled, in what place, it's in singular, but the meaning is plural. What places have you traveled? It's like, what have you been doing? But I think the American slang says it very nicely. What's up? Is basically his question. The rishi asks Sauti. He asks him, "What's up?" And what does he reply? Suta uvacha, Suta uvacha, Janam he jayasya rajarshe, Janam he jayasya rajarshe, Sarpa satre mahatmanaha, Sarpa satre Samipe partivendrasya, Samipe partiven, Samyak parikshitasya cha, Samyak parikshitasya. So Suta has been asked, what's up? Where have you been? And where was he? He was Sarpasatre. At the Sarpasatra, at the snake sacrifice. Whose snake sacrifice? Janamejayasya, of Janamejaya. He was at the snake sacrifice of King Janamejaya, who is Rajarshi. He is a kingly sage. He is Mahatmanaha. These are adjectives to Janamejaya. Janamejaya here is described as a great Rajarshi, not just a king, but a kingly sage. And he's also described as Mahatmanaha, a great souled one who is very wise. And Suta says that he was there in the snake sacrifice of Janamejaya. He was Samipe, in the presence. And the word Samyak in the last line has to connect there. Samyak, Samipe. He was immediately in the presence of Partivendrasya, of the greatest king of this earth. Partiva Indra is it's an idiom. To be the Indra among kings is to be the greatest of kings. So, and who is that greatest of king? Parikshitasya, of Parikshita. And here, in order to really get the sense of this, you really need to not just know Sanskrit, but you need to know the story, you need to know the characters. So Parikshita is the son of Parikshita. Parikshit, who is King Parikshit. Some of you remember, some of you may not remember. Let's just see the lineage, and there's a very important connection because King Parikshit is the father of Janamejaya. We just saw he is called here, that Parikshit is called, what does it say? Parikshitasya, the son, right, so he's referring to Janamejaya in the verse. Janamejaya, who is the son of Parikshit. And if you go back into the mythology, you'll find that Parikshit is the son of Abhimanyu. That's a little more familiar. Abhimanyu, who is the son of Arjuna. That's right. So Janamejaya is the son of the great famous king. Parikshit comes very importantly in the Bhagavata Purana stories, Devi Bhagavata as well. Parikshit is the son of Abhimanyu, who is the son of Arjuna. So Janamejaya would be the, I guess, great-grandson of Arjuna, and he is the one performing the snake sacrifice. And we have to find out why is he doing this snake sacrifice. We'll be talking about that in just a few minutes. So, in this verse 8, Suta starts describing what he has been doing, and he says, I was at the great snake sacrifice of Janamejaya. I was there in the presence of the son of King Parikshit, the son of King Parikshit being Janamejaya. And of course, there were a great number of sages assembled there, including Vyasa, and we'll see that here. Krishna Dvaipayana Proktaha, Krishna Dvaipayana Supunya Vividha Kataha, Supunya Vividha Katitas Chapi Vividad, Katitas Chapi Vidhivat, Ya Vaishampayanena Vai, Ya Vaishampayanena Vai. The line break is incorrect. Ya Vaishampayanena Vai. So Suta continues to explain that there, at that, remember we're seeing the outermost story, and he's saying that when I was here at the snake sacrifice of Janamejaya, what was going on there? Vividhaha kataha, various stories were being narrated. Various stories which were supunyaha, were very holy stories, were being narrated. And these are stories which were Krishna Dvaipayana Proktaha. Stories that were Proktaha, originally told by whom? Krishna Dvaipayana. Krishna Dvaipayana is a name for Vyasa. I'll explain. We'll see the explanation of his name shortly. Be patient, it comes in the text itself. So it's a name for Vyasa. So Suta says, I was there at the Sarpa Satra, the snake sacrifice. I heard these holy stories, which means the stories that comprise the Mahabharata, that were originally told by Vyasa. These stories, katitaha cha api, were being told vidhivat, according to the tradition. They were being told by whom? Vaishampayanena, by Vaishampayana. Vaishampayana, who was a disciple of Vyasa. Vyasa was also present there, but I think the tradition, at least vidhivat means according to the tradition. The tradition means that Vyasa is such a big shot, he's just going to sit very comfortably and let his disciple do all the hard work of narrating this long story. And the story is going to go on and on and on and on and on and on. And Vyasa is a very senior person, so he's not going to narrate it. He'll ask his disciple, Vaishampayana, to narrate it. And that's why, even though Vyasa and Vaishampayana, student and disciple, even though they are both present at that snake sacrifice, it is Vaishampayana that narrates the story as he learned it from his guru, Vyasa. Shrutva ta vichitrartha, Shrutva ta vichitrartha, Mahabharata samshritaha, Mahabharata samshrit, Didrikshur hagatas tasmat, Didrikshur hagatas tas, Samipam bhavatamiha, Samipam bhavatam. Suta, having been asked by the rishi, what's up, he continues to narrate. He says, Shrutva, having heard, Vichitrarthaha, those amazing stories, Mahabharata samshritaha, the great stories, amazing stories that are part of the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata could well be understood as a great collection of stories. Stories within stories within stories, as we explained. So he says that I heard all of those stories at that snake sacrifice, and then tasmat, later thereafter, after that snake sacrifice was over, tasmat, thereafter, didrikshuhu, I wanted to see you. Didrikshuhu, being desirous of seeing you meaning he's addressing the assembly of sages. Remember now that Sauti has arrived at this sacrifice. He's addressing, one rishi asks him what's up, but he's addressing the whole assembly of rishis gathered here, with Shaunaka being the foremost of the rishis gathered there. So then Suta says to Drikshuhu, I was desirous of seeing you. And therefore, agataha, that's why I came. So I came, samipam bhavatam iha. I came iha, here, to be samipe, in the midst bhavatam, of all of you. I came here to be with all of you after having listened to those stories of the Mahabharata that I heard where? That I heard at the snake sacrifice of Janamejaya. So whatever Sauti heard at Janamejaya's sacrifice, he is now going to narrate to Shaunaka and everyone assembled there. Now, these verses have been excerpts from chapter 1. We're now going to skip ahead to chapter 53. Now that's a big jump. And you're wondering, Swamiji, what are you skipping over? Why don't you teach it to us? Well, let me describe what we're skipping, just to give you a sense of that. It begins with a long description of the snakes. Where do all snakes come from? And it tells us really elaborate and bizarre story of a wife of Kashyapa. Her name was Kadru. She gave birth to 1,000 snakes who are the progenitor. To go figure, right? she gives birth to 1,000 snakes who are the progenitors for all snakes on this planet. This is the story. And then she gets into a big fight with Vinita, who I think is a fellow wife, one of the other wives. And they get into a big argument, and there's a bet, and then there's somebody loses and it gets really complicated. And it ends up with Kadru putting a curse on her own sons. Snakes. So the mother curses her own snakes, and the curse is, one day all of you and your descendants are going to be burnt up in a snake sacrifice. And then it goes on. This goes on for several dozen chapters. And there's one plot. I think Garuda and some others have a plot to try to rescue the snakes and all of this stuff. Really complicated. The snakes, Vasuki shows up. Shesha is there. There's one Takshaka, who is the king of the snakes, and he's going to have actually a pretty important role in the section that follows. So after this long, elaborate, and bizarre story about all the snakes, then we get the story of Parikshit, which is a little more important. So let me just narrate to you the story briefly so that we know what's going on. The story goes, and all of this, by the way, is to explain the snake sacrifice. The snake sacrifice is exactly what it sounds like. It's a sacrifice in which it's a ritual in which you sacrifice snakes. That's right. So why? What are they doing? Why is King Janamejaya doing this snake sacrifice? So here's the story. I guess in his first book, we have to get some of these stories. So here's an important story we should know. King Parikshit, the father of Janamejaya, was in the forest hunting, and he's out there for a long time. He gets thirsty. He sees a sage meditating. I think the sage's name was Shamika, if I remember right. So he sees a sage meditating, and he wants some water. So he sits down in front of the sage and waits for the sage to come out of meditation. Sits there after several hours, after several days. The sage is still meditating. And King Parikshit is still thirsty. He's getting pretty aggravated at this point. In fact, he gets so aggravated, he sees a dead snake, and he takes that dead snake and lays it around the sage's head and shoulders. Dead snake. All right. And he wanders on. The sage, Shamika, could care less. He just continues to meditate. Dead snake or no snake, he doesn't care. He didn't care about King Parikshit. He doesn't care about the snake. All he wants to do is meditate. But sometime later, the sage's son comes and sees his father with his dead snake laying on him, and the son figures out what happened, that it was placed there by King Parikshit. So not Shamika, not the sage, but the sage's son curses King Parikshit to die of a snake bite in 7 days. Now, some of you who have studied the Bhagavata Purana, you know this story well. This is an opening story in the Bhagavata Purana, because when King Parikshit learns of his curse, he says, I've only got 7 days left. So what is he going to do? If you only had 7 days left, what would you do? Interesting. Think about it, for real. This is Parikshit's dilemma. He has 7 days left. If you have 7 days left, what will you do? Everyone will do something different. What did Parikshit? He was very wise. He knew, I've got only 7 days left to gain moksha. So he goes to this Naimisha Aranya, he finds the sage Shuka teaching, and he sits at Shuka's feet to get Brahma Vidya in 7 days. Anyway, that's the story of the Bhagavata Purana. It's not our story here, so I won't go further on this. But what is the relevance for us in our study of Mahabharata? Well, King Parikshit dies of snakebite after 7 days, having listened to Shuka and getting enlightened in those series of lectures. But his son, Janamejaya, who's lost his father to a snakebite, the son, Janamejaya, wants revenge on all those snakes. Hence, snake sacrifice. And the way it worked, and this is just bizarre stories, wild, how much imagination. The mantras they chanted at Janamejaya's snake sacrifice had so much power, it would attract the snakes wherever they were. They would be driven, like a force of gravity would lift them from wherever they were and draw them into his Havan Kund, where all the flames are going. Those snakes were being inexorably drawn into that. Anyway, some snakes survived. Just an irony. We take an hour to tell the story in detail, but just to show some of the irony, the snake that bit Parikshit, whose name was Takshaka, the king of the snakes, guess who escaped being immolated in Janamejaya's fire? The one who bit his father. All the other snakes perished. He somehow survived. Just wonderful stories. But those stories are told in dozens of chapters, hundreds and hundreds of verses to tell all those stories. So if, with your permission, can we skip over all that? And we resume here in chapter 53. Something very odd happens. If you look at the Mahabharata, so the Mahabharata, obviously it begins in chapter 1 with this story that we're talking about, the story within a story, the story of Ugrashravas going to Shaunaka's sacrifice and and beginning to tell the story of what he heard from Vaishampayana. So then after that brief introduction, then we get the whole story about all the snakes and the story of Parikshit and the story of the snake sacrifice as well. All of this comes in dozens of chapters. And then what? We get a second beginning. The Mahabharata has two beginnings. Really. It begins in chapter 1. It begins again in chapter 52. What do I mean by it begins again? We come back to this story of Ugrashravas narrating the story to Shaunaka. So we return to that story in chapter 53, actually. Shaunaka uvacha, Mahabharatam Akyanam, Mahabharatam Akya, Pandavanam Yashaskaram, Pandavanam yashas janame jayena yat prishtaha janame jayet Krishna dvaipayanastada Krishna dvaipayanastada. So, Shaunaka is now speaking. Who is Shaunaka? He is the one who is in charge of the sacrifice in the Naimisha Aranya, the one to whom the storyteller Sauti is narrating all this. And he says, look at the bottommost line. Krishna dvaipayanaha tada. Tada, then in the sense of like once upon a time. As I said, this is the second beginning of the story of the Mahabharata. He says, at that time, Krishna Dvaipayana, name for Vyasa. What about Krishna? What about Vyasa? Yat prishtaha, he was asked. Vyasa was asked. Asked by whom? Janamejayena, by Janamejaya. Vyasa was asked. So now, Suta is telling us about this story. In this story, around Janamejaya's sacrifice, he says that Vyasa, who was there along with his disciples, Vyasa was yat prishtaha. He was asked. Vyasa was asked by whom? Janamejaya. He was asked by King Janamejaya. He was asked what? He was asked about what? Mahabharatam Akhyanam. He was asked about the story, Mahabharata. King Janamejaya asks Vyasa about the story, which is the Akhyanam. It is a story, Pandavanam. It's a story about the Pandavas. Yashaskaram, the famous story about the Pandavas. So Vyasa asks, King Janamejaya asks Vyasa about the story of the Mahabharata while they are all gathered there at the snake sacrifice. And Shravayamasa vidhivat Shravayamasa tada karmantare shusaha tada karmantare tamaham vidhivat punyam shrotumichhami vaikatam shrotumichhami. So Shaunaka continues to say tada, the second line, tada, at that time. At that time means during Janamejaya's snake sacrifice, at that time. Karma antareshu, in the breaks between rituals. In the introductory class I mentioned that these elaborate rituals went on for days and days and days. But the rituals would only take a couple of hours each day. So after you finish your few hours of ritual in the morning, what are you going to do for the rest of the day until the evening rituals begin? So the rule is that all the attendees in these big rituals, they had to be entertained. And the main style of entertainment, we said in those days, was not dancing, girls. The main style of entertainment was the narration of holy stories like the Mahabharata. So, karma antareshu. In the breaks in between the rituals of Janamejaya's snake sacrifice, during the intervals in between rituals, Shravayamasa saha he, Vyasa Shravayamasa. For a Sanskrit student, causal. It is causal. What is that? Causal periphrastic perfect. That'll really deter you from studying Sanskrit. I started using all these fancy grammatical terms. Causal periphrastic perfect. Oh gosh. No wonder people don't like to study grammar. All right. What does it mean? Vyasa, having been asked by Janamejaya about the story of the Mahabharata, as I said, Vyasa himself didn't narrate. What did he do? Shravayamasa. he made someone else narrate. That's what it means. Shravayamasa, he made someone else narrate. Who? His own disciple, Vaishampayana. So, Shravayamasa vidhivat, according to the rules, vidhivat, according to the tradition, he made Vaishampayana narrate the story. And here we're back to Shaunaka. Shaunaka says, aham, I, shrotum ichami, I want to hear. I want to hear katam, that story. I want to hear the story. Shaunaka wants to hear the story that Janamejaya asked of Vyasa. Vyasa told Vaishampayana to narrate it. Sauti was there. Sauti heard Vaishampayana's narration, and Shaunaka asks Sauti, please narrate that story to me. Tam aham vidhivat punyam katam. I want to hear that holy story, vidhivat, according to the tradition, according to the rules. I want to hear that story. Shaunaka asks from Sauti. And Sutovacha, Sutuva, Hanta te katayashyami, Hanta te katay. Mahadhakyanam uttamam, Mahadhakyanam, Krishna dvaipayanam, Krishna dvapayanamatam, Krishna dvaipayanamatam, Mahabharatam aditaha, Mahabharatam ha. Suta, having been asked by Shaunaka, please tell me that story that you heard at the snake sacrifice. And Suta replies, Hanta, O dear one, te, unto you, katayashyami, I will tell you. I will tell you, mahat akyanam, that huge story. Mahat akyanam, that huge story, uttamam, that greatest of stories, which was Krishna dvapayana matam, which was the mata, which was from the mind of Krishna dvaipayana, Vyasa. That story which came from Vyasa's mind, that story which is called what? Mahabharatam. The story that's called the Mahabharata. I will tell you, O Shaunaka, I will tell you aditaha. From the very beginning, I'm going to tell you. What chapter are we in now? Chapter 53. So in chapter 53, the Mahabharata is still trying to get started. After 53 chapters. This gives you an idea of the vastness of the story. After 53 chapters, we're finally getting started. Aditaha, from the very beginning, he's going to narrate. And Suta begins, he says, Shrutva tu sarpa satraya, Shrutva tu sarpa sat, Dikshitam janame jayam, Dikshitam janam, Abhyagachat rishir vidwan, Abhyagachat rishir vid, Krishna dvaipayanastada, Krishna dvaipayanastada. So we could say that the story begins. And how does the story begin? Look at the last line. Krishna dvaipayanaha tada. Tada then, at that time, once upon a time. Krishna dvaipayana Vyasa. What did Vyasa do? Go out to the first line. Shrutva, having heard. Having heard what? That Janamejayam Dikshitam, that King Janamejaya was Dikshita, he was initiated, he was made ready for what? Sarpasatraya, for the snake sacrifice. In order to do these very elaborate sacrifices, you don't just sit down and do the sacrifice. There are steps of preparation that are done weeks or months before the sacrifice. I'm sure that would include elaborate meditation and fasting and other preliminary rituals that King Janamejaya would have to do prior to the sacrifice. So that's why Suta narrates that Vyasa heard that King Janamejaya was Dikshitam. He was initiated, he was being prepared for the performance of that Sarpa Satra, the snake sacrifice. And therefore, Vyasa abhyagachat rishihi vidwan. Rishihi, that rishi, Vyasa, vidwan, who was so wise, that wise rishi, Vyasa, what did he do? Abhyagachat, he came, he arrived. So the sage Vyasa arrives at the snake sacrifice of Janamejaya, and this is being narrated by Sauti to Shaunaka, so we don't lose our place in the story here. Then, now we said earlier that one of the main purposes of this first book is to introduce us to the main characters. We're going to be introduced now to Vyasa. And Vyasa is a central character throughout the story. He's also the author. He's telling, so Vyasa narrates the story. Remember that the Mahabharata was narrated by Vyasa to Vaishampayana, and Vaishampayana who then narrates it to Janamejaya, Sauti who hears this narration, and Sauti narrates it to Shaunaka, but Vyasa was the first to narrate this story, and Vyasa is a character in the story that he's narrating. So we'll see several verses now describing Vyasa. We'll start to see some of the characters now. Janayamasayam Kali, Janayamasayam Shakte Putrat Parasharat, Shakte Putrat Para Kanyaiva Yamuna Dvipe, Kanyaiva Yamuna Dvipe, Pandavanam Pitamahan, Pandavanam Pitamaham. So who is Vyasa? It says here, Kali Janamayasa Yam. Vyasa. Vyasa Janamayasa was born from whom? The word used here, her name was Kali. You might know her name better as Satyavati. Satyavati had several names. Like, you remember, those of you who know the story, Matsya Gandha? You remember this stuff? So if you remember Matsya Gandha, you're doing well. That's good. You know the story well. Interesting. And you'll have to forgive me if I start telling these stories. We're just going to get stuck and we won't make any progress through this. So I'm only going to tell you portions of the story that are very relevant, less central parts of the story, with your permission, I think. We just have to, why is she called Matsyagandha? Long story about that, forget it. Matsyagandha is one who smells like a fish. She was a fisherwoman. So the story goes Satyavati, who's also called Kali. Kali here means the one who has a dark complexion. So she was a dark-complected fishing woman. And the story goes, some of you will remember the story, she's out in a boat, and this rishi, who is that? Parasharat Putrat Shaktehe. Parashara was this great rishi. And he was the putra, he was the son of Shakti, of another great rishi. So the son of the rishi Shakti, his name was Parashara. Parashara was this great rishi. And this Parashara wants to cross the river, and he asks this Kali, Satyavati, to give him a ride across the river. And as the story goes, this rishi desperately wanted to have a son without getting married. Very convenient. So what does he do? Without even touching this girl, Satyavati, she becomes pregnant with his son. and gives birth, janayamasa, she gives birth to Vyasa. Kanya eva Yamuna Dvipe. Kanya, that girl that you know as Satyavati, who's also called Kali because of her dark complexion. She, Janayamasa, she gave birth to, because of Parashara, who is the son of Shakti, she gives birth to Vyasa where? Yamuna Dvipe, on an island in the middle of the Yamuna River. Now, why that takes place, there are more complicated stories, so forgive me, we'll leave that aside. So she gives birth to Vyasa. Now notice two things. One is she is called Kali, dark-complected. If she gives birth to a son, genetics are such that son may also be dark-complected. The word Krishna means dark. And he was born on a dvipa. Dvipa means island. It can also mean peninsula. Here it means island. One who comes from an island, one who comes from a dvipa is Dvaipayana. One who comes from a dvipa is Dvaipayana. So Vyasa is often called Krishna Dvaipayana because he is Dvaipayana. He comes from an island, he was born on an island, and he is Krishna. His skin is dark in color. That's where his name comes from. And also he is Pitamaham. He is the grandfather, Pandavanam, of the Pandavas. He's the grandfather of the Pandavas. Yeah? How? Do you remember the story? Wait several verses. Just wait a couple of verses and I'll give you some summary of that story. Oh gosh. Anyway, before we see that, let us see a little bit more about Vyasa. So here, Suta continues his narration, talking about the great rishi Vyasa. Vivyasaikam chaturdhayo Vivyasaikam chaturdhayo Vedam Veda Vidam Varaha Vedam Veda Vidam Paravaragno Brahmarshihi Paravaragno Brahmarshi Kavi Satyavrata Shuchihi Kavi Satyavrata. Suta continues to describe Vyasa. Vyasa as Yaha, one who is Veda Vedam Varaha, the one who is the best knower of the Vedas, the one who is the wisest one, the one who knows the Vedas better than anyone else. What did he do? Vivyasa Ekam Vedam. We have to connect all those words and separate words. Vivyasa Ekam Vedam. Ekam Vedam. Without knowing Sanskrit, you know what I'm talking about. Ekam Vedam. You think, wait a minute, there's not one Veda. There are four. Well, before Vyasa, Ekam Vedam. There was one, meaning one collection. And what did Vyasa do? Vivyasa. He arranged them. How? Chaturdha. Into four groups. So Vyasa, Vivyasa. Notice the word Vivyasa includes the name Vyasa because Vyas means to arrange or organize. I'm sorry, V plus us is the etymology of his name. And Vyasa, the etymological meaning of Vyasa, V plus the dhatu us, means the one who organizes, the one who arranged. So Vyasa organized the teachings which were one group, Ekam Vedam. And what did Vyasa do? He arranged them, Chaturdha, into the fourfold organization that we know today. And Vyasa is further described by Suta. He is described as Para Avara Jnaha, the one who knows everything about para, everything of all spiritual wisdom he knows, and avara, worldly wisdom. Para, spiritual wisdom, avara, worldly wisdom, and he is jnaha, he knows both, spiritual and worldly wisdom. Also, Vyasa is called Brahmarshihi. Brahmarishi becomes Brahmarshi, the greatest of rishis, the highest rank of rishi. He was also a kavihi, a poet. You notice that these verses were not reciting as prose, we're reciting them with a meter. They're all poetry. And poetry means they have to have a certain order of short and long syllables. Almost all the verses of the Mahabharata are composed in a poetic manner so that they can be recited. So he is a great kavi, he is a great poet, and he is satyavrataha. He is true to his word. When he makes a commitment, he is committed to that. And he is shuchihi, he is absolutely pure. So Suta continues to describe the great sage Vyasa, and he continues that description. Yah pandum dhritarashtam cha, yah pandum dhritarashtam cha, viduram chapya ji janata, viduram chapya ji janata, shantano santatim tadvan, shantano santatim tanvan, punya kirtir mahayashaha, punya kirtir mahayashaha. So that Vyasa, look at the last line, that Vyasa who is punya kirtihi, who is famous for his holiness, and he is mahayashaha, he is extolled greatly, greatly worshipped, greatly honored. What about that Vyasa? Go back up to the top. Yaha, that Vyasa, aji janata. He gave birth. He gave birth to whom? Pandum, Dhritarashtra, and Viduram. Pandu, Dhritarashtra, and Vidura. He gave birth to them. Why? Shantanoho santatim. Because Shantanu, who is that? We have to remember. King Shantanu needed santati, he needed successors. Some of you know the story very well, but some of us, our memories are a little fuzzy, so we need a refresher. With your permission, 10 minutes can I take to give you an overview of the main characters of the Mahabharata. We better have this at least somewhat in our head. So it says here that Vyasa is the grandfather of the Pandavas and Kauravas. How? So let's get a refresher course. And there's a nice way of doing this. Not exactly a family tree, but we need to see the connection between various characters. It's all relationships. Mahabharata, more than anything else, is a story of relationships. It's amazing. And the relationship between every two characters is absolutely different. And so if you have, by the way, how is your math? If you have 3 characters, how many relationships can they have? So A with B, B with C, and C with A. If you have 4 characters, 6. If you have 8, if you have 10, I forget there's a formula for this, but it goes up exponentially. There are probably 100 main characters in the Mahabharata. How many possible relationships? Not all of them took place, but anyway, the point I'm making is the connections between characters is crucial. Not merely who they are, but how they're connected. So let's start. Well, we're going to start here with that Rishi Parashara, who, with Satyavati, gave birth to Vyasa. All right, so this is part of it. There's a parallel story, which we haven't even referred to yet, but we'll refer to it now, and that's a parallel story of King Shantanu, who meets this beautiful girl who is actually the goddess Ganga, and they give birth to 8 sons, the first 7 of which, we could narrate the story for an hour. The first 7 of those children are returned into the river for very valid reasons. Remember this? Some of you remember the story of the 8 Vasus? All right. I won't tell that again. It would just go on forever. Anyway, so of those 8 children, 1 survives. Who is that? He grows up to become Bhishma. Originally called Devavrata, later renamed as Bhishma. Now, before I continue, please notice that then Vyasa and Bhishma are like parallel in their seniority. In this lineage that we're going to develop, Vyasa and Bhishma are kind of the same generation, shall we say. That's crucial. We should know that. They're of the same generation. Now things get very complex. So king, as if it's not already, so here Parashara goes, Ganga goes, leaving Satyavati alone, Shantanu alone. Guess what? Yep. It happens. All right. And the names aren't too important, but if you care, Chitrangara and Vichitravirya, by the way, they're not important because they both die quickly. So they have these 2 sons, Chitrangara, who dies in childhood, Vichitravirya, who dies later in a battle. But fortunately, before Vichitravirya dies, Bhishma goes and kidnaps some wives for them. This is a tradition. So he goes and kidnaps some wives, one of which runs away, Amba, who becomes Shikandi in the next life. What a story. Gosh, forget it. Ignore Amba and Shikandi. We'll be here for 2 more hours. But Ambika and Ambalika are there. Let me do it horizontally. So Bhishma kidnaps Bhishma for the sake of his father. He wants to make sure that Chitrangara died in childhood, Vichitravirya is still alive. So he's going to, I guess we call them arranged marriages, right? What is the arrangement? He goes and kidnaps them and brings them back to get married to Vichitravirya, who very conveniently gets killed on a battlefield before the marriages can be consummated. Now we've got a problem. So Satyavati and Shantanu have daughters-in-law, but don't have a son. So where is Shantanoho Santatim? Where will be the descendants of Shantanu? So Satyavati lost her 2 sons. Wait a minute, she's got another son. And, right, she is a son of Satyavati. So Chitrangara and Vichitravirya died. Vyasa is still alive. Vyasa is this very austere sage, but Satyavati requests her son, Vyasa, this very austere sage, to bestow children on Amba and Ambalika. And again, in the stories, it's all done in a very, shall we call it, antiseptic manner, without any bodily contact. Go figure how that happens, but these great sages can do that. So I guess it must be a family trait. So Parashara had a son without any physical contact with Satyavati. So Vyasa manages to get sons without any physical contact with Ambika and Ambalika. Through Ambika, she gives birth later then to Dhritarashtra. Through Ambalika, Vyasa gives birth to Pandu. And there was a maid around. And, this sounds like a very risque story, doesn't it? But if you're not careful, when you read, I have to tell you though, when you read it, it's all told in a very elegant way. Honestly, there's nothing risque or bawdy in the way it's told. We're having fun with the story today, which is good. There's nothing wrong in having some fun with the story. But I want you to know the way it is told in the Sanskrit verses is in a very respectful way and without any of this silliness that we're introducing. So, with a maid, there is a third son via Vyasa who becomes Vidura, who is Vidura. So here we have the birth of the main characters. So in the verse it says Santanoho Santatim. So for the sake of Shantanu having successors, Satyavati having lost her two sons, she asks Vyasa to give her daughters-in-law, Ambika, Ambalika, to give them progeny. And thus Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidura are born. All right. So this is about Vyasa. A little bit more on Vyasa. This story, by the way, is so complicated. We could easily spend several hours telling you all the details of the story. That's not our purpose. Our purpose is twofold: to identify the characters and to know how those characters are connected, related to whom and how. That's the crucial part. Let's see just a little bit more. Janam he jayasya raja she janam he jayasya raja satad yajna sadastada satad yajna sadastada vivesha shishyay sahito vivesha shishyay sahit veda vedanga paragaihi veda vedanga paragai. Good. In the second line, saha, he, refers to Vyasa. What about Vyasa? Tada, then, at that time, Vyasa, what did he do? Vivesha. By the way, when I'm explaining these verses, just to let you know, you notice that I have to jump around a lot from one quarter to another quarter. That's the way the language works. This is not prose. If it were prose, you'd have subject, object, verb. Subject, object, verb. This is not prose. This is poetry. And because it's poetry, because it has to follow a certain pattern of long and short syllables, you find that the normal word order is disturbed, which means words get jumbled up. It's like a puzzle. You have to undo the word jumble in order to get the meaning. So if I'm jumping around, it's for the sake of getting the meaning. So tada, then, saha, he, Vyasa, what did he do? Vivesha, he entered. He entered what? He entered tat yajna sadas. In the second line, he entered that assembly for the sake of the ritual. That ritual assembly he entered. So then, I already erased my earlier stuff, sorry. Vyasa entered the assembly gathered for Janamejaya's snake sacrifice. So Vyasa, the Vaisha, he entered that assembly for the sake of the snake sacrifice. The assembly of whom? Janamejayasya. Janamejaya's assembly. Rajarshehi, for that great king, Janamejaya, Vyasa entered that assembly of King Janamejaya, and he entered Shishyaihi Sahitaha, along with his students, plural. He had many students, one of which was Vaishampayana, who was going to be the main narrator. And his students were Veda, Vedanga, Padagaihi. He entered along with his students who were very learned in the Vedas and the Vedangas. Vedas are the main scriptures. Vedangas are the auxiliary scriptures. And so Vyasa entered that assembly. Now, he's looking ahead. I think this will be a good place to stop for today. When we meet next time, we're going to see Vyasa is asked about what happened in the Mahabharata, and Vaishampayana will start the narration, and then the story begins again. So one time the story begins when Suta starts narrating the story. That's the outermost story. But then the story is going to begin again when Vaishampayana starts narrating the inner story. So notice how it's one beginning after another beginning to get this huge epic going. We will finish this introduction fairly quickly, and then we will, as thereafter, then we'll start getting the more philosophical teachings. I know this is all stories so far. We need to have the story in general. But as soon as we can, we want to go ahead and into the philosophical sections, and where we see the profound spiritual teachings. We'll see that very soon. All right, some closing announcements. Tomorrow, Sunday, we have our program for teenagers at 11 o'clock. Also, our Gita at Work study group at 11. You're all invited. At 5 p.m., mindful awareness meditation will be conducted tomorrow at 5 o'clock, mindful awareness. At 6:15, question-answer satsang that I'll conduct at 6:15. If you have questions, join us. Library will be open after class, and we'll conclude with our prayers. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.